Thanks for coming. I'm Craig Jervis, the school superintendent. I'd like to introduce Charlene Nardi, current chair of the school committee, and Fred Van, school principal. Dave Mathers, who is the chair of the school building committee, since it's regrets he's not able to attend. We'd like to introduce the architects from Drummy, Roseanne Anderson, Scott Wooden, Jason Boone, Jeff Squire, and Paul Moore. And Jim Barrett, who has been with the group, is not able to attend tonight, but he has been instrumental in helping us plan and put some of this together. May I ask the other members of the building committee to identify themselves, just for the other participants? Andy and Jim.
Andy Souls. I'm Jim Moran.
Paul Wetzel.
Nancy Millette.
Thank you.
Bill Sayre.
Bill Sayre, Charlene. There we go. So, and it's a good building committee. It's really starting to move. The project's really starting to move quickly. We're here tonight for the first workshop community forum. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Fred to kind of give you an idea of where you've been and where we think we're going in really broad terms. Then Fred will turn it over to Scott. Thanks, Fred.
This could take a while.
Well, usually I don't write anything down. I'll watch the clock. But I did take the liberty to write a few things down because I think putting it in perspective is important, especially now that we're in the place we are. 10 years ago, the Williamsburg Select Board, in collaboration with the school committee, appointed the elementary school building committee. And there's also history that precedes that, but there was a committee that was set up, and they were charged with looking at and assessing the status of the educational facilities at that time. The work was kind of the culmination of that was a feasibility study that was done by the architectural firm of Alderman and Page. The reason I state that and want to make sure that's good is that was important information and brought us to a particular point that was also shared forward with the architects that are working with us now. On February 2003, February 11, 2003, the Department of Education, under the direction of the governor, put a moratorium on all school building projects across the state. So basically everything was stopped in 2003. With that moratorium, it sat and it wasn't lifted into 2007 when the MSBA was created. MSBA was created by the Treasurer's Office. So now we had the Treasurer's Office taking over what used to be under the Department of Education. But now our school buildings are under the Treasurer's Office in 2007. Frankly, we were the first school to submit a statement of interest when MSBA opened up. It was so new they didn't have it electronic yet. We were doing it the old-fashioned way. By the time we finished, we created the electronic version for them. The reality of it is, you know, we did that at the same time they were coming out and doing an assessment of all the schools in the state. Through their assessment of all the schools, they basically ranked them 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 being a new school that was in great shape, state-of-the-art, 21st century school building. 2s were buildings that were in great shape, might have had some programmatic things to address, but they were fine for what needed to be happening in the community. 3s were defined as schools that had significant deficits, could stay open, keep their doors open, if they weren't going to have the Board of Health or someone shutting them down as yet. But you know, they had significant deficits. And 4, and there are some of them that were out there, there were actually only 7 out of the 400 or 500 schools that they were looking at. There were 7 schools that were 4s, they were open and shouldn't have been. We were not a 4. For our community, that was good to know. I mean, to be a 4 and be in a community, you don't want to be ranked as a 4. We were a solid 3 at the time, and from that ranking of being a 3, we were put into what was called, with our statement of interest, the planning phase. Planning, and with the state, they were looking at us in terms of planning. What that meant is we were to look at, with the state, kind of what options might be available to us. And it was really a 2-year process of being in planning. Other schools were in what would be called the feasibility study phase, which we're moving forward, which is what we're doing today. And others were actually doing some construction. They came into something a little bit quicker. But we were put into planning. For 2 years, it was in essence really limbo. We came to a point after 2 years of being in limbo that the town began to act without the state. We were looking at, and actually Jim Moran was critical in that. We had done some local assessment of our facility, had engineers that Jim arranged to come in and take a look at what we had, and began to plan without the state's involvement. Within 2 months, there was action that was taken that brought MSBA out here. Catherine Craven came out to visit us. And we are, as I think Scott was pointing out, a very unique situation for MSBA. We are smaller than anything they've done. They came out here, this was unique. They were not accustomed to, they haven't dealt with this size school with MSBA. So we met, we had a state legislator there, we had Steve Kulik, our local select board was represented, Charlene was there, and the school administration, and we just basically sat down, and the end result was, a month later, we received a letter saying, we're inviting you in the process. And that into the process was, we'd like you to go forward with the feasibility study. There were 2 phases in that. First phase that we needed to do was establish a building committee. That happened in September of 2010. That's the number of the people that are in this room now. And that was followed up by moving forward with the process, which was hiring first a project manager, which we did. Arcadis is the project managing firm. Ray Kinghorn is our project manager that's on site for us, and that'll be the person that helps to hire the architectural firm, and then if things do move forward, we'll coordinate the work that goes forward for us as well. The next phase was hiring an architectural firm to begin to do the feasibility study work, which is what we're looking at today, and we had the good fortune of having DRA brought on board, and came incredibly highly recommended from all people that were in. We interviewed, I think, 3 or 4 different school districts that had worked with them, and glowing recommendations across the board. Couldn't say enough positive about the work that they've done, and they're probably the most current organization, architectural-wise, that's working with MSBA. So we are very pleased and honored to have them as part of our team, and I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you. Let's hope we can live up to those high praises. First of all, thank you very much for having us here this evening, and thank you very much for letting us help to participate in your school project. We know that there's been a long history of work that's been done here, a lot of good work. It's voluminous, all of the studies and all of the drawings that have been turned over to us to study as part of our collection of information. And we really hope that we can help you to find the right solutions and help shepherd this through to become a real project and get it built soon. I want to just take a minute and tell you where we're at in the process right now, if anyone's unclear about it. Okay, we're at the very, very beginning of the process. We've been on board for about 4 weeks. The design team includes the architectural team with DRA, as well as a number of consultants. We have specialists for site design, specialists for HVAC, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, all of those as part of our team. All of those consultants, structural engineers, all of those consultants have been coming out to the building and completing a detailed survey and analysis of both of the facilities. We've also studied the site. We're searching down proper survey and topographic information so that we have a very well-documented site plan that we can start looking at options for the site design. And we've also started our educational programming, which means that we've spent a few days out here with the educators, with the administration, talking with them about their specific areas, their specific needs, so we can develop an architectural program, which is basically a a written narrative of what the architecture aspires to achieve, defining what all of their goals are. So again, we're at the very beginning of this process, and we're collecting information. Part of collecting information is coming here this evening with the community and trying to keep in mind, we've been here for 4 weeks, and you've been here for 10, 20, 50, however many years. And you know a lot more about the history of the project, nuances about the town, functionality of the site, functionality of the buildings. And we'd like to try to capitalize on getting as much information from you as we can to incorporate that all into our design process. Okay? Our design process, before we even start conceptualizing any types of solutions, we want to have 3 major components of information well ingrained in our subconscious. One is an understanding of the existing building and the existing site, what our opportunities and our restrictions are. Number 2, the educational program, understanding very specifically what the needs are for the activities within the building to support the educational teaching requirements of this particular community. And thirdly, understanding of what the other aspects are of the project that are important. And that's part of what we hope to derive tonight, is understanding a little bit more about the character of the community, the demographics in the community, what things are really important to the community as well as the educators here at the Dunphy and the James School. Let me just quickly, I'm going to keep this brief so we can break off into our work sessions, but let's advance the slide, Jason. Our process includes these 4 major steps, okay? We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about a schedule in just a minute, but we're basically in a 20-week process that's going to include a feasibility study, which is going to include existing conditions analysis, and then we're going to look at options for solving the problem once we identify exactly what the problem and the sub-problems are. And then we're going to pick a preferred option, and we're going to develop that up to a certain level of schematic design with cost estimates and engineering analysis and so forth. At that point, we'll submit it to the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, for their approval and endorsement, and then we'll start looking toward going for the town vote and going on to further design processes. That's just formality. So I talked a little bit about collecting information. It includes the educational programming, the on-site survey, as well as community workshops like this. We may also extend these workshops to include small work sessions with some of the students. We want to know what's important to them, and we certainly want to be responsive to that in our design solutions. Next slide, please. Listening, that's what we're going to do tonight. That's part of it. All of these meetings include collecting information about what's important to your community. Visioning, as I mentioned before, we're going to talk about specific options. And our objective at this point in the process, after we've collected all of this information and existing documentation, what we want to do is we want to explore the whole spectrum of different solutions for this. And some of them can be extremely far-fetched, but it helps us to, we'll only study them sort of topically before we'll abandon them. We'll look at it, we'll define exactly why that's not a feasible option. And sometimes some of the options may emerge as being half-decent options where they might have been considered a little bit radical in the beginning. So we're gonna run the spectrum, look at all the different options, and then we'll know that when we get to that preferred option that we've really exhausted all the possibilities. And documentation. We'll talk about that a little bit more this evening as well, but the documentation will include a very comprehensive set of documents, both for the option selection portion of the project, as well as when we submit to MSBA at the end of schematic design. Very comprehensive floor plans, exterior building elevations showing the character of the building, as well as detailed structural and engineering analysis of all the different systems. We're also hoping, maybe I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, is that in regards to this site, that this project can take on a little bit more of a gentrification process in terms of establishing a little bit more of a landscape in this front area here. The community workshops, you know, from the point that we get to, this is where we're collecting information, listening, and this is where we get to looking at options, and this is where we get to documenting the preferred preferred option. And we want to continue to involve the community as often as is practicable. Certainly at this point, while we're starting the process, we haven't started to draw anything yet. This oval, I'd like to slide this oval over here a little bit, because where this really wants to happen is once we've started to generate some responses, okay? So once we go back to the drawing boards in another week or two, and we start exploring different options, and we have graphics, and we have models, and we have computer models, we want to come back and we want to explore these with both the administration and the educators, but also the community, and get everyone's feedback on that to make sure that we're calibrated with everyone and we're going in the right direction. This is our overall schedule. I'm sure you can all read that, right? I'll let you read it yourself. But basically, and this is being a bit redundant, but these bars right here, collect information, develop alternatives, schematic design. Over the course of this process, we're going to have some community workshops. This was an early schedule, but this community workshop slides way back here, and we do have a couple more throughout the process. But what's important to identify here is we do have a couple thresholds where the state is very involved. They're paying for 57+% of this project. So we want to make sure that every step we take is in line with their regulations. They have very specific regulations now in terms of the process. You have to document your options analysis as well as schematic design very specifically according to their protocol. And we're going to make sure, I was just on the phone with MSBA this afternoon, starting the process, and we're going to be checking in with them on a weekly basis, make sure they know exactly what's going on so that there's no surprises in the process where they feel like we've stepped on their toes. As I mentioned before, we're going to look at a wide range of options, renovations to the existing facilities, addition renovations to the existing facilities, new construction, do nothing option. Some of these you might think, oh, that's not feasible for our community. How could we possibly do nothing? Well, we should look at doing nothing just so that everyone understands that doing nothing does cost money. Continuing to operate these facilities, the physical plant, the maintenance costs, the fuel costs, there's going to be a serious cost that's going to increase over time if you maintain these existing facilities. It's not a zero cost option. There is a cost associated with it. Next slide, please. And what we like to use as a tool, even though a lot of this is by intuition, both for you and for us in terms of what comes out as being the best option, but we like to develop an option matrix that helps us to establish what the criteria are for the project success. And some of that we might actually glean from our discussions tonight, you know, what criteria are important. And we list those and we give it some sort of a numerical value, and we can actually quantify the success of different options. We do this. We check in with the school and with Fred and with the building committee. It's not just our system unilaterally; it's more your system. But we want to understand, you know, what the important success measures are for this community, and then for each of the different options, we can give them a numerical value. And a lot of times, this tests out to be the same solution as the intuitive solution. And at the end, we have a document that says, well, this is really how we analyzed it, and there's a little bit of science to it. Okay. And what we've included here, just to give you a benchmark as to where we're at, we as I mentioned before, we haven't studied any options. We haven't taken out any tracing paper yet. We haven't sketched anything. What we have done is we've taken the existing drawings that we have had that were provided to us by the school department, and we've entered those into AutoCAD. Okay, so we can start to analyze the square footage against the required square footage per the state requirements, and we can also, this will be our base drawing for generating different options for renovation addition scenarios to the two existing schools. And as you'll see here, you can just flip through these quickly, Jason. We've also started to extrude a three-dimensional model in SketchUp so that, again, we can quickly manipulate that and start looking at additions in different directions. We can quickly incorporate color and textures and site features, as well as sun analysis, sun and shade analysis during different times of the year. And we've started to put together the aerial photographs. These are indispensable when it comes to sort of understanding at a glance different site dynamics. We'll obviously have drawn site plans and a lot of photographs from different angles, but an aerial photograph, everybody can quickly understand how different elements are being manipulated relative to the existing condition and existing context. And we've got the same information generated for the James School as well. Now, both of these schools are approximately around 22,000 square feet, right, both of them. And the educational program, what we're doing is we're looking at, we've got 170 students, and they need this big of a cafeteria, and this many classrooms, and this big of a gymnasium, and this big of administration offices. And we're starting to build up that program of spaces so that we can understand what the needs are. And we haven't quite defined that yet, but it certainly doesn't fit within 22,000. We know that for sure, is that either one of the school bodies cannot be put into the other school within its existing footprint. If it was going to be a renovation scenario, it would be renovating both of the facilities and continuing to operate with your current grade configuration, or combining the two schools, which would result in an addition to one of the schools. So that being said, we're ready to break off into our work sessions. Unless anyone has a question right now, we'll also be available afterwards if anyone has questions. Most of the slides here are printed on boards around the room. We'll be happy to stay as late as you'd like to talk about any questions or issues that you'd like to discuss further than what we discuss in the workshops. Our workshops tonight, we have a discussion about the container over here, which talks about the existing buildings, the existing sites. Again, we're not talking about options, we're just talking about perceptions of the existing conditions and what issues are important, okay? This topic center right here is current, okay? This is talking about, we want to hear about trends, demographic information, you know, things that are currents underneath the surface that may affect the school project, such as other than educational uses within the building, other needs that the community has that might be serviced by this building, and how this project might affect some of your other municipal buildings in site. We want to talk about those types of things. And again, we don't come with a lot of information about this right now. We're trying to gather it from you. And our third topic center will be contents, which talks about the activities and functions within the building and the educational program and sort of how the classroom is going to be used.
Can I say something about that? Because that's my group.
Absolutely.
We have the best group. And notice, we're closer to the food.
Forgot about that. So, and please feel free to sit in on a group, express your concerns about that, move to the next group. So we're just going to do a real quick recap as to what we heard in each one of the groups. My condolences to anybody who didn't get a chance to go over to that group over there. That's where it all happened. So just wrote down a couple of notes. We had a great conversation. We touched upon, got into a little bit more detail about some of the things we've already heard about superficially. We talked a little bit about a hydrology issue at the James. At the back of the area was the back of the site was always wet. Along the basketball court, all the way over to the brook was soggy. They identified some organic or odor in the soil at James School when they were excavating for the playground structure, which could just be indicative of the saturation of the soil, or possibly some organic layers. Not necessarily contaminated soils, but just some organics that are decaying over time. We need to identify whether there's an actual wetlands, but there's wetlands species at the back of the Dunphy School site that we need to have a wetland scientist come out and evaluate. We talked a lot about the kitchen program and how the kitchen program, we'd like to see some enhancements to the kitchen so that they can realize visions of utilizing local food sources, and also the relationship between the kitchen and the gardening program here, the gardening program that seems to be integrated in all aspects of the educational curriculum. That also got into a discussion down here about composting and recycling, which are both big initiatives of the school. We talked a lot about the library and how the library is off-site, and you utilize the municipal library for the school's library needs. and the possibility of that being expanded to take on more uses for the teachers, for planning and programming areas. Everyone was very much in favor in our group. Everyone was very much in favor of the library being off-site as a community integration piece and exercise for the kids and a little adventure for them each week when they go there. And there's also some concern expressed for the historic value of the James School and maintaining that as a resource for the community going into the future. Where's my dice? Jason, you want to talk about your group's discussions?
we were the best group. Just nobody else knew it. Yeah, we had a great conversation actually, and some really important things came out. For me, I'll start with this one up here. It's sort of written kind of small, but there's a sense in the community that there's a really high level of value for education in general. And so there's a real pride in the educational system here, and that was important for us to hear. We talked about a lot of things, but I think probably the most important thing outside of the support of education was this idea that this feasibility study and whatever its outcomes are the pebble in the pond, right? Mm-hmm. So if, in fact, the two schools are combined into one building, that leaves one of the two buildings empty, and now the decision has to be made about, okay, what goes in that building? And once that step happens, and then, okay, now another building is empty. And so, although all of those decisions are not within the scope of our feasibility study, this idea came out that this part of Williamsburg really sort of behaves like a town campus, and that maybe what's necessary is some further study. I think we wrote, maybe we didn't write on it, but maybe what the town needs to do outside of this project is embark on a town-wide master plan to sort of address all of those other ripples that may result from something coming out of this feasibility study. We discussed a lot of possibilities for what those other ripples are. I won't take time to go through them, but they included town facilities and senior centers and things like that. The last important realization, I think, that sort of relates to that is really how much the schools use the amenities that are around or outside the property line. We realize that we may have drawn this red dashed line across somebody's vegetable garden, but that notwithstanding, I told her that at the next meeting we're going to move that line a little closer. That's how we get property now. So we took the time to sort of map where the children are taken outside of the school boundary. And one of them is, you know, sort of out down this path and across and over to the library. We heard about that from Scott, but it turns out that there are other locations. They cross the street, go over here to the river for the salmon release. That they do a history walk around this part of town. And they even go, I wrote birdie, but I think the term is birding.
I'm birding with my kids.
Okay. And that at one time there was this continuous loop. There used to be a bridge here, right? And people could make this circuit of this historic part of town. And we circled that because, you know, maybe that needs to be addressed if the town-wide master plan ever came to fruition. And then going in the other direction, there's a garden here that serves as a destination for both schools, but that it's not permanent or historic anyway and needs to be considered moving forward, that maybe it can actually be picked up and relocated. So what I took away from our discussion was there are some bigger issues here than what are just sort of inside the boundary lines. And not all of them will be within the scope of our study, but it's important that we know about them so that we can describe them in terms of educational program to the state. Did I miss anything important, folks?
Well, I think just for the group today, when we talked about possible use for the James School or the Memphis School, whichever way it went, that your assessment would really tell us what the conditions of those buildings were, which would be very helpful.
Yeah, so we expressed that we probably couldn't go so far in the studies to say whichever school is vacated, is appropriate for these kinds of functions, but that our facility assessment would describe in detail the condition of the building and whether or not it needed accessibility improvements or it needed structural improvements or needed new windows, so that someone could look at that report and say, okay, well, it needs those things, maybe we can apply this function to it. But it wouldn't go so far as to suggest a use for any buildings that are left over as part of the study.
Okay? Think of this as a meal. We have salad, we have the main course, I'm dessert. All right. We were talking about contents, or talking about the activities and functions that are in the school. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Anybody who was in my group who wants to elaborate, you'll have a moment at the end to do that. The school needs more meeting spaces, more places for people to get together, small group and office type spaces. There should be a principal's office. There was also a reminder that says there's been some talk about having a collaborative space. Okay, there is none right now. Collaborative is a place where you can have special ed students that need more support, and this is the kind of space that is usually shared with other regions. So another school would send some special student to here, and you would send yours to there, and it works out well because not every community has to have every special space there. That's what collaborative is. A parent center, a place for parents to get together and meet with each other. The gardening program was a big one. We talked about that quite a bit, and I think all of our groups have taken that under their wing because we find that as being one of the unique characteristics of this school that needs to be encouraged. A greenhouse could be incorporated when we're thinking about doing this new planning, and that would be something that was wonderful. We even talked about having the greenhouse be an integral part of the building, not just an offshoot, but actually it could be like a greenhouse entrance or something like that, where it actually becomes part of one of the spaces that you need to have anyways. The kitchen, if it were improved, it should have the ability to be used by students, to be as a class function in there. The cafeteria could be greatly improved and be more usable for other functions besides just serving food. More of a social type of space. Maybe it needs better acoustics so that you have the ability to hear one another and not be bombed, with all these magnified sounds. The entry needs improvements. There's a couple of things that happen, especially during drop-off and pickup time, when a lot of people in the community are waiting around out there and they interact with each other, and it's an important thing. The entryway does not facilitate that very much right now. And also there's some concerns about safety, where the buses and the cars are not separated at all. And sometimes the traffic flow isn't clear because some people understand that there used to be a one-way system and other people don't, and it's not that clear. So improvements both from the pedestrian point of view as well as the vehicular point of view. We'd like to have more ability to display artwork, and this was also integrated with the idea of having this sort of social cafeteria space. We even talked about that as being maybe thought of as a student commons, idea. It's a place that students want to be. Natural light should be brought into the school as much as possible. Together with sustainability, we talked about sustainability as a goal that should be kept going. To us, sustainability is one of those things that we've done for a long time. We love to hear the client request, because that means it's more likely to be actually carried along. It's an active thing as well as a passive thing. School is hard to find. So you're driving down the street and you think you're going to come to the school, and you drive right by and you miss the turn. The school itself is hard to really spot, although it's very important to the community. The gym space is extremely important to the community. There's a lot of functions that go on there. It has been used in the past, used quite often for seniors who will come in and use it as a walking space. It houses all kinds of adult activities as well as the youth activities. The Old Town Hall, there's a building which is right here. Did I get it? That, right? That building, that needs to be looked at as a possible way to extend the site. Okay? I'm not going to say more than that, but it's an opportunity. Go for it, guys. Separate bus from cars, we talked about that. Oh, we talked about the library. They like to have the kids going down to the library. Seems to be a wonderful opportunity for them to get a little bit of exercise, be part of the town, and so forth. But there needs to be some sort of a library-type resource room in the school, some place where things can be held or collected in one place so that it's a little more organized than it is right now. And need a teacher's lounge. Right now they don't really have a comfortable place where they can withdraw and maybe have a private conversation. Got the gym. Oh yeah, the entrance. This was an interesting point. The entrance to the school, to the site of the school, should be reoriented such that the brewery is not so important.
Yes.
All right? So we got that. All right, anything else from my group? Or anybody else, actually?
Well, there was a mention at the end of making the school safe in terms of whatever technology we have, that students and teachers and staff are radiated as little as possible. And I don't have I've never done any original research or anything, but I just am wondering about that, because teachers are here for 20, 30 years, and how the building is built in terms of that could have a huge impact on their health.
Okay.
Specifically, you're talking about the use of wireless technology.
And the radiation, radio waves are kind of a low threshold radiation stuff. Yep. Okay.
I had a question about general building security. Is that part of the design process?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, right now, actually, the way the office is located and it has windows looking in all directions, it's pretty good for them. However, I think when you go forward with the new building and you might have multiple entrances going into a larger building. We talked before about saying, okay, maybe this is too big a building to have the kindergartens come in the front door and make their way down into the kindergarten room. So there might be additional entrances, and so it could be a concern.
At this level of study, we don't usually talk about where the security cameras go or who's watching the monitors, but we do talk about things like circulation and whether or not there are dark corners in a schematic diagram, for example, whether or not there's passive supervision of spaces. That sort of level of detail will get discussed as the options get developed.
Right on time. Thank you guys very much. And thank you all for participating. As I said to Charlene, we were hoping to have a really good group. I was hoping for more people, but those of you who came were really energetic and shared a lot of really great ideas. So thank you for coming. So what's next? The school building committee has a schedule. We meet every 2 weeks. We'll be meeting through the summer, going through the listing and visioning phase, getting to the document phase. Early fall, I believe we're looking at.
Yeah, September.
In September.
For the completion of the
schematics feasibility. So there is a regular meeting schedule. Every 2 weeks we're coming together. I wanted to acknowledge Fran Ryan, who's here from the Gazette, so this will get out to the larger community as a newspaper article, and I encourage you to share any ideas that occur to you at 3 o'clock in the mornings that I should have said. Call Fred. I have a couple more weeks, and I got to get my last one in. So thank you very much for coming. It was great to see all of you. Thank you.